Hillary Rodham Clinton and her daughter Chelsea have teamed up to write a book all about women who've made a difference. Reason enough to catch up with them at a New York City landmark for some questions and answers. Looking in on a 20th century giant.
I think she was one of the greatest Americans in our history.
Hillary Rodham Clinton and daughter Chelsea at the Eleanor Roosevelt Memorial in Manhattan.
She is a kind of transcendent figure over generations because of all that she did in her life.
I just find that depiction of her to be, as I imagine her, thoughtfully listening, taking it all in.
And at the New York Historical Society, a racket from the hands of tennis legend Billie Jean King.
It says King,
King?
B.
Look at that. Oh, I love it.
Here's a century-old banner from the women's suffrage movement.
I have one of these at my home, and I have it over the fireplace. I look at it every day.
The mementos breathe life into a collection of stories called the Book of Gutsy Women, co-authored by mother and daughter, and published by CBS's Simon and Schuster.
Women have been written out of history from the very beginning of recorded time, and to a great extent still are. And this is a small contribution to the efforts to tell these stories.
The collaboration between 71 and 39-year-old was at times an intergenerational challenge.
Because I write longhand. So I actually brought a sample of this horrible writing, and then I use an app and I send it to her, and she laughs at me.
So this is what I would get.
She laughs at me endlessly.
Although it's not so illegible, I could still read it.
Some of their earliest inspirations were familiar characters from books and TV.
When you handle yourself, use your head. When you handle others, use your heart.
Donna Reed seemed like the perfect mother to me and my friends, and Nancy Drew was a huge influence.
Oh, I love Nancy Drew, and I really looked up to her. It's the same way I felt about Meg Murray in A Wrinkle in Time. All of these fictional heroines who just meant so much to me.
Among 103 real-life portraits are unsung heroes and greats like Amelia Earhart and Harriet Tubman, and another First Lady.
The reason I chose Betty Ford is I remember as though it were yesterday. My mother's best friend had breast cancer, a phrase that was never uttered. Nobody talked about breast cancer. And then a few years later, along comes Betty Ford, who gets breast cancer as a First Lady. And I remember she's in the hospital room. She obviously had her hair done, good for her. And because of her, breast cancer came out of the deep, dark shadows.
But no one looms larger for Hillary Clinton than Eleanor Roosevelt.
When I ended up being First Lady, she was one of the people that most inspired me because of how she tried to keep thinking about those who were left out, left behind, marginalized.
You write about discovering that her husband had had an affair with his secretary.
Right.
This was devastating, and she offers Franklin a divorce, which he rejects. And you write, she decided to stay in the marriage, parenthetically, which can be, as I know well, a gutsy decision.
Right.
You had to discuss with your daughter putting that. What did you say?
Well, part of the reason that I admire Eleanor Roosevelt is the way she handled that happening to her. And I say, look, when something happens in your marriage, as I know well, it can be gutsy to leave, it can be gutsy to stay. I felt like I had learned so much from her that I wanted to share that with the reader.
And you said,
It's my mom's story to tell. I've always felt that way.
Being your candidate has been one of the greatest honors of my life.
No surprise, 3 years after the historic election of 2016, she's still grappling with defeat.
how are you doing now, and what are the metrics by which you know how you're doing on any given day?
Personally, I'm doing well, and having my grandchildren, and especially a new 2-month-old grandson, has been a gift beyond measure. I feel very blessed, I feel good. But I can't deny that a big part of me cares deeply about what's happening in the country, and what I fear is the damage that's being done to our future, the damage being done to our values, our institutions, and try to think of ways that I can help those who are on the front lines of the fight.
Your name doesn't come up much on any campaign except for Donald Trump's. Lock her up is still a big popular line.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did, and I take responsibility for those parts of it that I should, but Jane, it was like applying for a job and getting 66 million letters of recommendation and losing to a corrupt human tornado. And so I know that he knows that this wasn't on the level. I don't know that we'll ever know everything that happened, but clearly we know a lot and are learning more every day, and history will probably sort it all out. So of course he's obsessed with me, and I believe that it's a guilty conscience in so much as he has a conscience.
Of course, given the events of the past week, now the question is, how will it end?
The president must be held accountable. No one is above the law.
This is familiar territory for her.
The House Judiciary Committee voted to recommend that the House impeach President Nixon.
In 1974, Hillary Rodham was a young lawyer on the House Judiciary Committee staff looking into the impeachment of Richard Nixon. And of course, in 1998, as Hillary Rodham Clinton,
You lived through an impeachment as First Lady in the Clinton administration. What is your view today on Donald Trump's prospects for impeachment?
Given this latest revelation, which is such a blatant effort to use his presidential position to advance his personal and political interests, there should be an impeachment inquiry opened. And I don't care who you're for in the Democratic primary or whether you're a Republican, when the President of the United States, who has taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and by that, defend the American people and their interests, uses his position to, in effect, extort a foreign government for his own political purposes, I think that is very much what the founders worried about in high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, what could happen if in another 4 years of the Trump administration?
I don't accept that. I don't believe that will happen. I believe that there were many funny things that happened in my election that will not happen again, and I'm hoping that both the public and the press understand the way that Trump plays this game.
She worked really hard to become the person she became.
you might say the same about Hillary Rodham Clinton. And like Eleanor Roosevelt, also loved and loathed. But by any measure, a gutsy woman.
You wrote a book with your mother, so Hillary Clinton's name is on the front of the book. But as a portrait of gutsy women, she's not in the book, except maybe between every line.
I think that's very accurate. I just got the chills when you said that, Jane, because I couldn't imagine any moment of my life without my mom, and I'm so grateful not only that she's my role model, but that she is my mom, because my kids are going to grow up in a world that I believe is immeasurably better for her gutsiness.